Any politician or public figure who has spent the last couple of decades trying to persuade you that you should punch yourself in the face in a electoral booth, or that making rich people richer and poor people poorer would somehow help you, despite the fact that you're not a rich person. Anybody who has sought to demonize refugees or pretend that having regulations and protections in place for consumers was somehow oppressive or wrong. Anyone who's encouraged you to become part of the first population in human history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself, or put Liz Truss into Downing Street, or believe that Boris Johnson might somehow change his spots after a lifetime of moral depravity upon getting into Downing Street, or letting Kwasi Kwarteng loose. Any of that lot, almost guaranteed they will be jumping on the let's suppose net zero next bandwagon. Keir Starmer facing difficulties from within his own ranks for taking relatively tentative steps in what is obviously the right direction. If the urgency of the situation had been communicated to enough people in enough constituencies, they would have followed Brighton and Hove and elected a Green MP. So why is it not happening? And I'll take any answer you've got on that, because I think it's a really important and very interesting question. You can even, if you wish, go for some of my greatest hits and explain the role that the media has played in essentially keeping people in the dark. In New York this morning, quite literally in the dark, because the atmosphere is so smoky that the sun can barely be seen. 13 after 10. And then the second question, and this is a question for the ages. This is the $64,000 question. Whenever I say the $1 million question, I've got a very pedantic correspondent who always complains. The figure of speech, I believe, is the $64,000 question. What should or could they do differently? And I'll take, again, anything you've got on that. Should they be giving up on having a party of their own and seeking instead to exert more influence from within other parties? Should they be deploying different tactics? Should they be aligning themselves with more radical outfits like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, getting involved in more direct action, running the risk, of course, of getting arrested? It can't be a coincidence, can it, that Jenny Jones in the House of Lords, who we spoke to yesterday, is leading the fight against this government's attempt to ride roughshod over hundreds of years of parliamentary tradition and overrule Parliament on a whim, the whim being that a Secretary of State should be able to decide what is a peaceful protest and what is not, which is kind of scary, really. It should be a statute book issue, that. And it's a Green politician in the House of Lords that is fighting that battle. Probably not a coincidence. Which protests are, at the moment, most likely to draw the most heat, the most attention? Answer: environmental protests. So the politicians have tried, and while they haven't failed, they haven't enjoyed anything like the sort of success we might have expected to see in 2010. And the, what would you call it, the sort of guerrilla wing of the environmental movement remains pilloried by almost every corner of what we'd have to call the mainstream media and, of course, the fringe media. All sorts of signposts here towards worrying scenarios in the future and, I think, confusing scenarios in the past. So why does the Green Party not enjoy a much greater profile in this country, given that the issues about which they care most and upon which their entire movement have been built have never, ever, ever been more urgent? I suppose people who dispute the science are part of the problem, given that they are the sort of fodder of Tufton Street and right-wing media. But I always remember reading absolute no marks in the Daily Telegraph 10, 15, 20 years ago. And even when I wasn't particularly engaged in this issue, I remember thinking, why are they publishing them alongside? And did someone who's done history at Oxford writing articles about climate science poo-pooing about 90 to 95% of the canon of actual climate? It's just bizarre. It's like a precursor, wasn't it, for COVID and Brexit and so many other things where idiots were allowed far too much room in the public space. But that's not what today's about. Today's about this. Why have the Greens not done more since Caroline Lucas was elected to Parliament in 2010? And what should they be doing differently? And of course, I have to acknowledge who's listening. What should you be doing differently? Why haven't you done more? I'm interested in the horizon question, because here's a theory, or no, here's a speculation. If you got all of the media outlets in this country, specific to this country, that have spent much of the last 20 years trying to demonise people born elsewhere, right? If you know all of those front pages, I've been looking back over the Daily Mail's front pages in the sort of 3 weeks running up to the referendum vote, apart from taking a morning off after Joe Cox was assassinated by a man who largely agreed with the Daily Mail's editorial position on immigration. It was staggering, even to me, that if those front pages talked about things like Arctic sea ice and global warming with the rhetoric and the passion, if you like, that they talk about people born in other countries, would that turn the oil tank around? I mean, if they used all of their powers that they use for evil, if they suddenly started using them for good, would they still work? Would they still be powers?
You know, that's a great thought.
It is, isn't it?
You'd hope
we should crowdfund and buy the Telegraph, Josh. We could start the fight back starts here.
100%, and you would hope that. And this is where it's a strange box you've opened because of the culture wars that probably don't exist to the extent these right-wing outlets suggest they exist to, but they know that it's what divides people. They know it's what keeps them present, and there's all the people who sort of fund it and stuff. I think you're right. I think if more of the media had equal coverage and people were actually putting problems in the front page that will actually affect all of us, irrespective of class, creed, political ideation, then maybe more people would actually turn around in these coffee shops and think, actually, I'm less bothered about what women are using men's rooms and vice versa.
Yes.
We've actually got a real problem about trees will exist in.
That would be just be an
years.
interesting experiment, wouldn't it? Just to literally put the same energy into reporting on the environment that you put into reporting on transgender toilets and see what happens. Instead of asking politicians whether or not a woman can have a penis, ask them how they feel about the fact that the summer ice in the Arctic, one of the key components of the Earth system, has gone. I mean, it's literally gone. It's the first major component of the Earth system that we are going to lose because of global warming. But hey-ho, down with e-scooters.